That's the biggest challenge. We can solve a problem quickly or we can do it right.
For today's episode, I'm excited to be joined by Kiren Sekar, the Chief Product Officer at Samsara, a cloud platform for physical operations.
I remember hacking together prototypes of Bluetooth sensors and saying, hey, do you realize how cheap this is? You could start putting these little chips on everything.
He's been with Samsara since its founding, and previously was the VP of Marketing at Meraki, scaling the company from $5 million in revenue to over 500 before it was acquired by Cisco.
This is something that could actually make an impact at a global level over multiple decades.
In our conversation, he explores what it means to actually be customer-centric.
There are a lot of really successful companies and they have different true norths. For us, it was the customer. How could I say yes to as much as possible?
We discuss how the company identified its ICP, how customer conversations helped identify unique product features, and why they built multiple products within the first few years, all within an industry that had relied on outdated systems and technology.
We saw a lot of mainframes, a lot of pen and paper. There was this combination of technologies that we thought could really change that.
Let's dive in. Thank you so much for joining.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
I thought we could kick it off and you could sort of share a little bit of context in terms of what was going on 12 months before you all started Samsara.
I started working with our co-founders, Sanjit and John, at Meraki, which was an IT networking company, back in 2009. The two of them founded the company out of grad school at MIT. It was 35 employees, a couple $1 million in sales when I joined. Fast forward to late 2012, and we'd scaled the business to about $100 million in revenue. Cisco acquired the company for a little over $1.2 billion. And then really the next phase was, how do we make sure that this product and this team that we really care about is thriving within Cisco? And as you know, a lot of acquisitions, they fail. We wanted this one to work.
Just for a sense of pride, or there was some other reason?
Yeah, a sense of pride, a sense of care about the customers. You care about the product that you work hard to build. You care about the team that you built and think that it can do a lot of good in the world. There was no financial incentives or anything tied to it. It was really just, you want things to succeed. And so that first year was about, how do we actually get this business established within Cisco? And that was often what happens when large companies acquire small companies. And we got to the point where the product was selling really well within Cisco.
Was their sales team selling it in, or
Yeah.
it was more kept separate?
No, and it was actually, what we said, the way this works is you take their tens of thousands of sales reps and hundreds of thousands of channel partners and get them excited about this product. And, we had to overcome, I think, a lot of assumptions about, this is for SMBs, it's not for enterprise, et cetera. But, we found those evangelists, we got it working, we showed them customers getting excited and showed them how it was good for their business. Showed them that the team was a really strong team as well. And so when that got to the point that there was real momentum, I think for myself and for Sanjit and John, we wanted to be building a company. So we kind of made the deliberate as kind of a probably year-long process of handing over the business to the next generation of leaders. Some of them are still there. Many of them stayed for, 5-8 years and kind of transitioned.
That was in year two?
That was in year two. We called it the process of evaporating, right? So how do we make us leaving a non-event so that the business can keep growing? Towards the end of that, I started thinking about what I wanted to do next. And I ended up talking to lots of different startups and VCs and founders, and talked to early stage companies, late stage companies that were just being formed. And, for me personally, I realized that there was really a couple of things that I was optimizing for. Right? One was I realized how lucky I had been with the people I got to work with at Meraki. And I realized that caliber of team was actually not common. And then also I saw that, we had built something that was really having impact at scale. And I said, whatever I do next, I want there to be the potential for there to be even more impact at an even larger scale. And that kind of filtered out a lot of things that maybe were interesting products or point solutions, but you couldn't see them getting big. And then in parallel, started talking to Sanjit and John about what they wanted to do next. We all somehow started talking about IoT, the Internet of Things, and what was becoming possible from a technology perspective. And we can talk more about some of those details. But then we also started talking about markets. And, at Meraki, we were building primarily it was a wireless networking products, and it evolved over time into a broad set of networking suite. But we were selling Wi-Fi systems to everyone. Everyone was putting in Wi-Fi networks, often for the first time. And what we saw was that what people were connecting to their networks and what they were doing with their networks was so wildly different. You go to a bank or a hospital or a carpeted office space or a tech company, and they've got great software and great tools. And at the time, they're starting to really rely on mobile and tablets and data and cloud. And then we'd look at our customers in construction or food and beverage production or the logistics networks and these kind of physical operations. And we saw a lot of mainframes, a lot of pen and paper, a lot of green screens that you type on for 10 minutes to make a small change. And we started kind of connecting the dots that these are really big, important industries. They didn't have access to data, they didn't have access to software, but there was this combination of technologies that we thought could really change that. We said, hey, this is something that could actually make an impact at a global level over multiple decades. And I decided this was what we wanted to spend the next chapter of our life on.
When you were reflecting on that and the opportunity set, was it in an attempt to find an opportunity to start a startup? Or was it just you're having lunch and you had noticed when you were talking to this customer, wow, that's pretty different than a Silicon Valley company?
I think it was a little from column A, a little from column B. We were definitely thinking about what we wanted to work on and build next. But I think that there was also a process of just kind of playing and tinkering and looking at what was possible. And, I remember John, our CTO, hacking together prototypes of Bluetooth sensors and saying, hey, like, do you realize how cheap this is? Like, you could start putting these little chips on everything. And, that process of pretty organic technology or exploration, while also thinking about the markets, is kind of what I think gave birth to what we ended up building.
What were the other things that you were taking from the Meraki experience? One of the things that you mentioned was that, seeing real world impact in customers. So that was a sorting criteria. Were there other things in those first handful of months that drove sort of here's the customer, here's where we're going to start, here's the culture, here are the people, sort of those type of things?
At Meraki, we were doing it all for the first time, and we were doing it by intuition and trial and error. And when we started Samsara, there was the opportunity to look backwards and say, okay, what were the things that were really keys to the success of the company that also aligned with just how we organically enjoyed working, and we wanted to recreate those elements. And we knew that there are a lot of things that are very contextual, like about the time, the business, the customer, but there are certain things that felt a bit more fundamental. And I think there's a couple of things that we got to be deliberate about bringing over. One was really being customer-centric and starting with, what does the customer need to be successful, and how do we work backwards from that? And it sounds kind of obvious, like who doesn't want to be customer-centric? But if you look at, there are a lot of really successful companies and they have different true norths, right? If you think about Apple in its heyday, it was a design-first company, or Google in its incredibly high growth period, I'd say it was like a technology first company. Banks that are profit first, right? There are different kind of true norths. I think for us, it was the customer.
And was that the same as Meraki?
Yeah. That's something that I think we did organically at Meraki, and we said, okay, that's something we want to replicate. I'd say another was really being long-term oriented. Like, Meraki ended up being acquired. We never planned on selling the company. We always kind of made decisions assuming we were going to live with them forever. And I think that actually worked really well. It's that long-term orientation, but then combining it with how do you optimize for speed and iterate. So I think that idea of long-term orientation, knowing you're going to live with decisions for a very, very long period of time, but also saying, how do you work towards that long-term vision with a very high pace and kind of constantly tacking and correcting as we went. And then I think the third is we really focused on quality of team and kind of consistency of culture. Again, we did that very organically, but said, hey, that worked, and that is timeless, and that was definitely a priority from day one at Samsara as well.
What does quality mean for you when you think about it in the context of talent or people?
I think people who are intrinsically motivated, people who are doing something because they believe in it and they want to make it successful, as opposed to purely chasing some external reward. Everyone needs those too, but people who are fundamentally want to be building something, and you see them actually doing that in their spare time when no one's looking.
Talk more about that. Like in the context of an interview, how do you figure out if somebody's intrinsically or extrinsically motivated?
It's great to learn about what people do outside of work. Are on the product or engineering side, are they trying new things and do they have, novel opinions about them? Are they building side projects? And, I think at some point everyone realized, hey, to interview well, I need side projects. But then can you go deep and can you ask them more and more questions? And is it clear they didn't just do it to have something on their resume, but they wanted to create something and they get excited when they talk about it, right? And they can talk about what they learned and what they would want to do differently next time. And I think just the ability to kind of keep peeling back layers and how deep someone goes is a great way to understand, were they intrinsically motivated or were they trying to kind of complete an assignment?
On the first point about customer centricity, when do you feel the most trade-offs with that? Or when is it hardest to be customer centric? Because it is one of those things that's a little bit like apple pie.
Yeah, I mean, it only counts when it costs you something, right? I think, a lot of the best examples are when it feels like there's a trade-off. We can solve a problem quickly or we can do it right. We can make the customer experience good or we can hit our gross margin targets. Whatever it may be, having people say, okay, let me see if I can find a clever way to simplify the problem or optimize the solution and actually bridge the gap and find a way to do both, right? That's the biggest challenge. Because ultimately, if you build something that customers love, but the unit economics are terrible, you're not going to have a business. If you got great unit economics and the product doesn't work, you're not going to have a business. When you can actually find a way to thread the needle, that's kind of where the magic happens. I think also, finding ways to say yes and win, especially I think once there is some momentum, there's a lot of people who say you need to say no to as many things as possible and focus. Not saying you should never focus, but also you should say, well, for a customer, how could I say yes to as much as possible? And sometimes that feels unnatural, right? You're kind of exposing yourself to risk. You might fall short. And a lot of people don't want to do that for internal audiences, for customers, but by kind of stretching yourself to say, how can we actually solve as much of your problem as humanly possible? I think, again, that is what kind of creates that outsized impact.
Are you often willing to deviate from your roadmap to do so? Or you're constantly trying to balance your own roadmap with any given customer and all the little things that they're asking for?
We try to have a long-term vision that it changes over time, but it's a little bit it's more stable, right? And it's rooted in data and experience and customer feedback. The specifics of how we build that vision over time ends up being very fluid and very dynamic based on that feedback from customers and what we're hearing on the street. And so I'd say the roadmap details can be very dynamic and very loosely held as we get more and more signal from customers. But that vision is something that we kind of keep moving towards unless or until something, very fundamental changes, like a new technology like AI, for example, or a major shift in the market.
I'm sure when you're building the company and you're spending time at Coca-Cola or pick any large enterprise, they're like, we really need this, or this is a problem we have. And sometimes it comes in the form of forward deploy engineers or sales engineering, or if you went to the extreme of customer centricity, you could quickly just become a consulting shop for Pepsi or pick whatever company. You could also go in the other direction, which is like, we have a vision for what we're doing and, the more classic Jobsian thing.
We have always focused on prioritizing the products and the capabilities that are going to be, cross-cutting and broadly appealing. We try to make truly one-off work very, very rare. I think there's something that happened both at Meraki and Samsara that was really helpful in the early days, which was we started off primarily focusing on mid-market customers. And, the only way that we were going to be successful was by solving repeatable problems. And we found that actually this was kind of a sweet spot for us in the early days. The very large enterprises, to your point, they would have a lot of maybe customer-specific requirements. Some of them were not even customer specific. It was just a high hurdle to get a product to market in terms of reporting and scalability and security and customization and all those things. On the flip side, there were SMBs where they might be able to deploy products very fast, but they didn't have the kind of depth of feedback that you get when someone is a professional user of a product, right? Who's kind of using that product all day, every day. And so these mid-market customers with maybe a few hundred to a few thousand at the higher end employees, they were able to give us really high quality, deep feedback because you were selling to professional buyers and professional users of the product. They didn't expect 50 custom things because they weren't getting that from other vendors, but we could actually be engaged with a large number of customers, really find those common threads. And when we start hearing things from 50, 70, 80% of the customers, you go build it and turn it around quickly. And then you get very tactile feedback around, hey, I love this, but these 3 things, I have to go visit 3 different pages. I do this 50 times a day, make this easier. Or I love this and it's solving this problem, but I have this other problem that looks very, very similar. If you could make these changes, you could solve a bigger problem for me. And, having that kind of customer feedback, but getting it across a large sample of customers, I think really helped us build these foundations that were broadly applicable. And then over time, we kind of filled in the gaps to really be able to move up market. And today, most of our business is enterprise. We still have a large mid-market base as well. But starting with mid-market worked really well for us, both in Meraki and Samsara for those reasons.
And I guess to the point you were making, it's much easier to go mid-market and kind of chew your way up to enterprise than it is to start way down market and then sort of try to make the hop to enterprise?
Yeah, I think that we found that mid-market customers use the products and buy the products like a simple enterprise user. Whereas in some cases, the SMB customers, they're actually closer to a consumer, and it was more of a fundamental difference. Whereas the bridge from mid-market to enterprise, we could do very incrementally. And they start getting larger and larger and more complex. And then the next thing you know, you're kind of working with the largest of the large enterprises.
So let's go back to the beginning. One of the things you were explaining is your co-founding team was noticing some things and was partially thinking about starting a company, partially reflecting on what was happening in Meraki, different things connected to Wi-Fi networks, and then new technologies, sort of what you could do with Bluetooth at very low cost. What happened from you all sort of chatting and saying, that's interesting, to like the first thing you thought about building or actually shipping to someone?
It was a little bit unusual. We started with a very high level and honestly kind of vague, hey, there's these big set of operations industries that are underserved by technology. There's something interesting here. And then also saying, hey, there's this new technology stack where we could take sensors and connect them to the internet, connect data from those sensors into the cloud and build applications on top of them and do that in a way that was easy to use and cost effective. And we did some research looking at who was building IoT companies at the time. And it was names like, GE and these IBM and these large conglomerates. And then there were some startups building kind of developer platforms for IoT. And no one had built a product where it was plug and play and easy to use. So you had these companies who would go to, a very, very, very large customer and say, we're going to bring in sensors from one company and connectivity from another, and then stand up a cloud and then build custom software. And it would be, a $50 million project that meant that it was very, very limited. And then there was these developer platforms where they said, here's a way you can build IoT products, but the end customer was non-technical, right? And so they weren't really able to engage with them. So we said, there seems like there's an opening here to build something that gives customers visibility and data, and it does it in a way that is easy to use, where kind of an everyday operations company could get it up and running in an afternoon. So we actually started by building a prototype very quickly.
And at this point, did you say, we all want to start a company together, we're going to start prototyping and exploring, or it wasn't even that formal?
No, at this point, I think there was kind of the playing with stuff in Sanjit's basement, once we started kind of building prototypes and getting them in customers' hands, at that point we'd started the company and said we're going to do this. We had a small initial team. The first product that we built, again, a really kind of a way to get working product into customers' hands and start that feedback loop. It was very simple, but it showed the vision of what we were doing and allowed us to get real feedback. And so what it was practically was a little box and it had a cellular radio in it. So you can kind of think about it like a cell phone without a screen, and it connected to power, and then it could connect to different inputs. And so we said, how do we start by just getting data from the physical world into software, into the customer's hands?
And at this point, had you spent time talking to customers?
We were talking to customers, but we got this prototype done like 8 weeks for, the hardware piece, the software piece, kind of getting it all working end to end. And then we just started going to prospective customers and saying, hey, we've built this technology, we have this vision. Can we try it out?
And were these like friendly relationships that you had from Meraki, or like where did these mid-market customers that would let you plug this stuff in come from?
So we had some friendly customers from Meraki that happened to be in these operations industries. And then we did a little bit of lightweight PR around starting the company. And, this was a set of industries that had really not been focused on by Silicon Valley. And there's a small fraction of the folks in these industries who are early adopters and were reading, the tech blogs, and some of them knew Meraki from setting up networks, etc. And they actually were inbounding to us saying, "Hey, we're excited about what you're doing. Keep us posted." I remember we set a goal of saying, "How do we get this prototype installed in 100 real customers' environments, and how do we do that quickly? How do we do it across a set of industries and environments so we're kind of seeing the broad market?" And, I remember that we thought that temperature sensing was the thing that was gonna work. That was gonna be the first product. We said, think about all the industrial refrigerators. If one of these things fails, they've got pharmaceuticals. They might have, lobster and caviar in them. Like, of course you'd want to be able to monitor those. Some of the early customers, they were trying this out. They weren't paying us any money. They were just curious and wanted to help us out. They thought it was cool. And I remember them saying like, "Hey, this is really cool. I can see it from my phone. It can text me when the temperature changes, but you guys know these things don't really fail, right? Like, this is not a real problem." But then, one of them, it was Cowgirl Creamery, a cheese producer in Northern California, said, where we lose product all the time is in trucks, in transit. Is there a way we could put one of these on a truck? And so we found a way to, connect it to a vehicle and get power from the vehicle. And that kind of led the way to our first successful product, which is saying, how do we track a vehicle? And then how do you track its cargo? And starting with kind of refrigerated transportation, and then along the way, finding all these other problems that customers had. They had no idea where these things were. They had no idea if they had engine faults, etc. All of these kind of became clear by actually getting product in the customer's hands and hearing about what the real problems were and then trying to solve them quickly.
So before you had the 8-week prototype, you didn't do more classic sitting down with end buyers or customers, doing needs finding. How big of a problem is this? Where's the urgency? You more sort of had a sense that there's some opportunity in this new form factor of technology. Let's go build this prototype and let's learn by bringing it to the customer.
Exactly. And, as I was talking about earlier, the vision that I think we had a lot of conviction in was when you bring data and visibility to an environment where there previously was no data and visibility, it is just useful, right? We've seen that everywhere, retail, financial services, healthcare, pick your industry. And so that we felt pretty clear about what it looked like. And is it, temperature or trucks or warehouses or factory equipment? That was the piece that we had to find out by getting product in customers' hands. And I think that had we done traditional market research, I don't think we would have ended up at the same place, or certainly not as quickly. But actually showing customers what was possible, showing them a totally different user experience, helped them provide the feedback of, hey, I get it, and this is where it can be most useful.
Before you had the Cowgirl Creamery insight, what were you seeing in customers? Was it a bunch of, oh, this is kind of cool, that's interesting, but it's not solving a massive problem? Like, how would you describe the before and after and what you were seeing and hearing from customers?
It was not as linear as we tried refrigeration and then we tried refrigeration in trucks. I mentioned we were, doing the refrigeration piece. Part of our vision was also that we're not trying to find a single data point for a single industry. We're actually trying to build a platform and, thinking about what did a company like Salesforce do for sales teams and for customer data in the early 2000s? How do you have kind of that equivalent for the world of operations? So while we were kind of running this loop with refrigeration, we were also talking to water utilities who were saying, hey, I get leaks and it's hard to figure out where these leaks are. Or when I need to run pumps at certain times of day, the energy is incredibly expensive. Is there ways that I can smooth that out? We actually thought that vehicles could be interesting, and we talked to transportation fleets about, how do they track their trucks and what does that look like? So we were kind of running these experiments in parallel and of seeing where the biggest engagement was occurring. Where were customers saying like, hey, this is something that's really impactful. Like, I need you to build this. And that kind of created signal. It also helped us make sure that, as we started building product, we were building something that could be broadly appealing and we weren't building something for a very, very niche audience. So then when we actually, finally launched our product, we actually, again, had a few different use cases that we were selling into, refrigerator trucks being one of them. But then we kind of kept running this feedback loop of having a broad aperture, getting signal, doubling down where there was customer engagement. And, I think that really helped make sure that we were building towards that vision of a broad platform for a broad set of industries and not hyper focusing on something that maybe ended up being limiting over in the long run. And actually, it's interesting in our space, most of the technology providers, again, weren't Silicon Valley companies. They weren't even big tech companies like the Microsofts of the world. There were a lot of these point solutions that were building technology for a very specific problem in a very specific industry, but they were never able to get enough scale to really invest in R&D and kind of build the kinds of things that you or and I would consider a modern technology platform. And we said, hey, actually having that breadth is going to be something that is really important. So something that from early on, we made sure we kind of balanced, getting feedback from large sets of customers and large markets while also solving the problems in front of us where customers were saying there's a need.
What happened after you came across this insight from Cowgirl Creamery? Did you then decide to narrow on that use case, keeping in mind that the goal is always to build a broad platform, but that you wanted to nail that use case, drive repeatability around customers, and then land and expand? What ended up happening? You kind of got a prototype working. They were seeing a lot of value, and then what happened?
It was a balance, right? On one hand, we were saying, hey, we're getting signal here that refrigerated transportation is a problem. So let's go make this work well. But in parallel, while we're doing that, we're having our product on trucks. What are the other problems that people are having with trucks? They don't know where they are. Either they have no way to track them or, they have a GPS tracker that reports location every 15 minutes. We know from getting an Uber that you can track a vehicle in real time. We know how useful that is. So you're not waiting out in the rain for your car. We should build that into the product. And that's something that probably customers other than Cowgirl Creamery are going to be interested in as well. And then in the process of doing that, saying, hey, what else happens with these vehicles? Hey, we're looking at them and a bunch of them have their check engine light on and the driver's driving with it anyway. That doesn't seem good. Let's figure out a way to connect into the diagnostics port and understand if there are fault codes. And so it was that process of continually pulling the string and seeing what more can we do? And then who would this be useful for? And so as we were solving problems for Cowgirl, we were also talking to lots of other fleets and operations businesses, trying things and then kind of doubling down on what was working.
you're sort of hitting on this, but what were the handful of things in that year after the Cowgirl Creamery Insight that ended up being a part of the early sort of saleable product?
One of the things that we did that was really helpful was we started pitching and trying to sell the product to a pretty diverse set of industries early on. We were pretty intentional about kind of looking at the pie chart of industries we were engaged with. Again, I think we kind of did this intuitively at Meraki. At the time, everyone was trying to deploy Wi-Fi networks. Some of our competitors were saying, "Hey, we are going to be the Wi-Fi provider for healthcare." And we're saying like, "No, we want to build products for everyone." And we ended up with a very diverse set of customers. We were, I'd say, intentional about doing that at Samsara as well. And so, I remember we had, Transportation Tuesdays, where every Tuesday we were focused on talking to customers in transportation verticals. We would otherwise be talking to food and beverage or construction firms, these different industries that had fleets and we thought could benefit from what we were doing. And then, we were really kind of running the feedback loop of, okay, you're excited about this. What do you need in order to deploy it and pay for it? By just running that feedback loop across a wide set of customers, we went from 1 million in ARR to 17 and then 70 the year after that. Along the way, what was fascinating was we were getting more and more feature requests that were related to tracking trucks and primarily kind of around location and fuel and compliance. And, it ended up taking us many years to build out all of the features to be able to really sell to the whole market. But in parallel, we started getting customers asking us, "Hey, is there a dash cam that works with your system?" They were asking us, "Hey, like, who do you recommend?" And we said, "Well, hey, if we built one, would you want to try it out?" And a lot of them were saying yes. And this is an example, I think, of how we were very conscious about trying to balance that depth and breadth. And it seemed like a really useful thing, right, to be able to have video. And again, there was that technology lens of there's a couple of companies doing this. They're pretty clunky. They were built on the kind of 2G and 3G network where you got very low res video. They're hard to use. But we saw that actually the technology that was really being driven by mobile phone adoption was making video really high quality, really inexpensive, and you could actually start streaming it over the air. So we prototyped a dash camera that was kind of integrated in the system. And then we started giving it first to some of our existing customers and then letting some of the customers who were asking us about it, letting them try it out. And they're saying, wow, this is exciting. And so, could have easily said, no, we're not going to do that. We've got this big list of telematics, fleet tracking products to go build. But there was a combination of you start hearing the same question from more and more customers, and then seeing that actually there was a potential technology inflection where you could build something that was truly different from the rest of what was on the market. And so it was actually in that second year that we built our dash camera. And it's since evolved into this product that basically helps customers really understand their risk and dramatically reduce it. And it's actually now our number one product by revenue and growth. But it came by running that feedback loop and kind of being willing to find a way to say yes and figure out a way to get something done when we were hearing signal from customers. And we thought we could do something differently than it had been done before.
When you're actually spending time with customers to unearth something like, hey, there might be an opportunity in dash cams, is it just you have a very close collaborative relationship with your customers and you're hanging out at their office? What else is on your mind? What are you thinking about? Like, how are you actually getting this information from the customers?
Generally, focusing early on building relationships with customers, and you quickly figure out who are the early adopters who are excited about what you're doing, want to be part of it. And it actually, makes them more engaged and more loyal when they get to provide feedback. And, as long as you actually act on it and do something with it, it creates this virtuous cycle. Part of it is just being willing to, get on a plane. And most of our customers are not in, San Francisco or New York or Boston. So we're going all over the place. And it's, indirect flight with a layover and then a 3-hour drive. We had a customer advisory group from very early on. We'd invite them to San Francisco to our office and spend 2 days with them, sharing our roadmap, getting their feedback, sharing ideas, kind of doing allergy tests of show of hands. How many of you would find this useful? Like, here are 3 ideas. How do you rank them, right? Getting that feedback with people who are already using the product, who actually have kind of a vested interest in the company's success, and then there's trust. We did that very early on, and we still do it today. That has been very, very powerful.
I think a lot of the conventional advice is you want to start by monopolizing a very narrow ICP. And then once you've dominated that, you move on to the other. Once we do that, then we're going to go and try to launch our financial services vertical. And then we're going to launch, et cetera, et cetera. And it seems like one of the things that you all did was you wanted to be very broad from day one, and you didn't want to sort of take that strategy.
Going broad and, finding those 80/20 solutions that actually work across verticals. I think it worked really well for us, both at Samsara and Meraki. I think part of it was actually, working backwards from saying, hey, how do we make this a meaningful business at scale, right? We wanted to do something that could be a large self-sufficient company that could build lots of things and get them in front of lots of people. Working backwards from that, like, you can kind of translate that into revenue goals, right? And you can say, well, if we want our revenue to look like this in 10 years, in 5 years, in 2 years, in 1 quarter, knowing that the long term, there's a high error bar, but like, this is a vision of what success could look like. You start working backwards, and then you think about the size of the market, and you say, well, if I sold this fleet tracking product to every cheese company, how quickly am I gonna run out of market? And then in parallel, thinking through, well, if you hyper optimize there's a risk that actually you build something that is so narrow that it ends up not really providing leverage in other industries. Whereas if you take the other approach and say, I want to actually engage with a broad market, you end up finding these cross-pollination opportunities where you're getting feedback from one industry, something that other industries aren't even asking for, but then you build it in the platform and all of a sudden everyone starts using it. I'll give you a couple of examples. We were working with a school bus fleet early on. You said, we need to track our buses. We have no visibility what's going on. We don't know if they're properly maintained, if they're late, if they're on time. But it's not just about us. We actually want to be able to share location with the kids' parents. And yeah, we saw what you can do. It's real time, like Uber. We want to give that experience to parents so they know when to meet their kid at the bus stop. And we said, okay, good idea. So we built a simple location sharing system where you could share the real time location of a school bus with someone who isn't a user of our platform. They get a live tracking link, kind of like you would get with an Uber or Lyft. We started showing that to other industries, and all of a sudden they're saying, oh, I can tell you all the different ways that I would use that. I'm a construction company and I pull a dump truck up to a site, and now that truck is sitting around for half an hour waiting for a crew to come move that pile of debris and get it into the truck. People are sitting around, everything's getting gummed up. If they could have a tracking link, then they could have everything ready right when that truck arrives. You think about all the different examples like that. We would not have prioritized that feature if we weren't talking to lots of different customers. But by finding areas where certain industries were giving us feedback and kind of applying the judgment of this could be broadly applicable, ended up being just an amazing source of kind of product ideas that benefited everyone. Mobile apps was another one. We started building mobile apps for drivers. And early on, it was customers who had very specific compliance requirements. Hey, they need to complete these forms. These forms are getting mandated to move from paper to electronic format. Can you build an app for drivers to do that? We started thinking about, well, if you put a smartphone in the driver's hands, what are all the other things you could do with it? All of the other paperwork they're doing, you could digitize. You can start attaching photos to things. They can be messaging with their dispatcher. They can get training and coaching. Had we just focused on feedback from one industry, we would have ended up with a compliance app now we've got this, really broad set of tools for frontline workers. And so I think that, by starting with, okay, we have the ambition of we want to build something that's going to have really broad impact, engaging with the broad market, we're able to kind of pick and choose what are the things that we are going to build that are going to have the most impact. And ultimately, if you don't meet the needs of an industry, they're not going to buy your product, right? So it's not like we could go so broad, but not actually connect the dots all the way to making a useful product. And, revenue is a way to keep yourself honest there. But I think being able to say, okay, we're trying to maximize revenue growth, but we want to be doing it in a way that is pulling all the best ideas from all these different types of customers ended up being really powerful.
What else about this setup allowed you to grow so quickly in a market that I don't think was a traditionally good buyer of software?
Ease of use and time to value. And that's still something that we really focus on today. We really wanted the product to be something that, in 15 or 20 minutes, you could get it set up and see the value. If you're trying to deploy it across a large organization, of course, that's going to take time and change management. And we've got to physically stick boxes into vehicles, construction equipment, et cetera. But if you've got a small branch or division, can you do a free trial? Can you set it up in an afternoon and see why it's useful? That was part of our sales motion from day one and actually dictated how the product had to work.
How did you come up with that?
That was actually a big part of Meraki as well. Most of the networking industry at the time, it was pretty complex. And if you wanted to deploy an enterprise grade network, you needed network architects and design. And there was a lot of configuration and customization. And it was a pretty big, expensive project. We said, we're going to make a network that's simple, that's plug and play, that's still usable by a business that has security and management, but you can actually get it up and running in an afternoon. And that was really what created the core product fit, market fit at Meraki, because it turned out that it was not just the big, slow moving IT groups who were deploying networks. It was everyone, and people didn't have time for a multi-week or month project. So we saw that work and saw that it was a really key part of rapid adoption. And all of us experience it as consumers as well, right? You and I don't have tolerance to try something in our personal lives if it's going to take weeks to set up. So that was kind of, again, one of those things that we just sort of felt fundamentally we should build things that you can get up and running quickly and see the value quickly. We also focused on how do you actually make it economically valuable to customers very quickly. Operations industries traditionally have not spent a lot of money on software and technology, but they have massive budgets, right? Our customers, they spend tens, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars a year on just fuel. And we're really trying to say, hey, if you take a little bit of that, put it into technology, you're going to see big savings, but they have thin margins. Big budgets, thin margins. You're not going to spend money on a product if it is not economically valuable quickly. That was actually a really great forcing function. Like I remember in our lives building products for IT organizations, there were some customers who would buy something because they thought it was neat. And the IT department had discretionary budgets. They're technologists. They thought that something was cool. And it's actually really dangerous because as a startup, you think, oh, I'm building something that is getting traction, but not very many people make decisions like that. But you can kind of fool yourself into thinking you have product market fit, and then all of a sudden you can't scale and customers aren't renewing. In operations, customers don't part with their money if there isn't a very clear ROI. So it actually helped us very early on hone in on those use cases that customers really, really cared about that provided real value. So, hey, I tried this, and in the first week, we had a truck. Someone left the door open. We would have lost $15,000 worth of cheese because of your system. I didn't. Or, we were able to cut our accident rate in half, and we're able to take a chunk of that savings and put it into a driver rewards program, and we've lowered our turnover rate. Right? Those types of economic impacts, actually making them clear and fast, was really important in getting product market fit and then in ultimately growing from there.
When you thought about pricing your product, was it simply an ROI model?
We would always kind of start with what is the customer's next best alternative. And in some cases, there was nothing on the market. In a lot of cases, there was a competitive product. I think most of our products, we weren't necessarily the first. We just had a different approach. And so even if we had a very different approach and it was more modern, easy to use, et cetera, the customer does have an alternative, which is, hey, I could buy this legacy app. Maybe it doesn't do everything that yours does. And so we think about how do we operate in that market context and what is our ability to price versus the next best alternative. Early on, it was actually like, how do we make this an easy decision for customers, right? Which means if there's existing vendors in a space, maybe there's the really expensive one, there's the really cheap one, aim to be in the middle, right? And if we can actually deliver a better product than the most expensive product, but at a better price, that's a lot less convincing you have to do. As we've grown over time and we've started building more things that maybe didn't have a direct analogy, we've got to do a bit more discovery and it gets a bit more nuanced. But we thought about, are the unit economics sustainable? And is it a no-brainer for the customer? And if the answer is yes, go sell it and grow. I'd say, even now we're not focused on extracting every dollar possible. We're focused on actually how do we have customers say like, that was the best technology investment I ever made. And that means leaving some value on the table, but the market is so big that we end up doing better by, optimizing for growth and making it an easy decision for customers while also making sure that we've got healthy unit economics along the way.
Is part of it that there is a surprising amount of anchoring in the customer's eyes? Like, I assume if you looked at a few of your early products, they were vastly better in every dimension, which ultimately meant that there would be more cost savings than the best available alternative. And so one would imagine that you should charge more. Other than wanting to make it, I guess, a no-brainer buy, do end buyers just think about it, yeah, your dash cam is vastly better, it's going to save us all this money, but this is what it costs for a dash cam, and it's hard cognitively to get off of the anchoring of existing products in the category?
There's a little bit of anchoring. There's also, I think, skepticism of customers who have been burned in the past. And I think as we have developed more reference customers and built a brand and reputation, that allows us to have more pricing flexibility. But, ultimately, we're still very much just focused on, what is going to drive the most growth and finding that right balance.
What about, is there anything you figured out in pricing a platform? Or I assume many of your customers buy many of your products and it's all integrated, and that's one of the special parts of the business. Is there anything about how you price that? Or it's like, the average dash cam is this, so that's generally what we're going to charge you for that for that product?
Not always something that you can quantify and say, I'm going to get a higher ROI by having these things connected. But they say, hey, if I've got a single set of users, all of the data ties together, all of the APIs and integrations work together. Actually, the products can talk to each other and make each other better. That provides a ton of differentiation. So we don't charge for the platform. It's really, hey, the reason you would like to buy these 5 products from Samsara as opposed to 1 product from Samsara and 4 from 4 other companies is, hey, each of these products kind of stands on its own as best in class. But then you put them all together and it's way better for the customer and the end user.
In talking to different folks on your team over the years, I heard some people talk about the way that you goal around revenue. At least product managers that seemed very customer focused, but also many of them, I think, had, or at least in the past, had a revenue number that they were trying to hit for their line of business.
We've tried kind of different goal structures over time. But I think one of the things that we kind of figured out early on is that, especially for newer products, revenue is the best metric for product market fit. It's a proxy for customer value and impact. And if we've got high revenue growth with solid unit economics, that means that things are working. I think that has really helped product managers, especially product managers who are working on new products and new apps, say, hey, I know that, good looks like this, great looks like that, and this is what off track looks like. And actually it becomes, I think, really fun to be able to have a number that you can hit and beat and get over. I mean, everyone appreciates that, but it also translates really well. There's a lot of areas where that metric worked really well in the early days. But, when we look at our more mature products, there's a lot of different factors that go into a customer deciding whether or not to buy one. And actually, you could have revenue look healthy, but the customer experience is degrading, and that's going to catch up with you. And in a few quarters or years, you're going to see that in revenue. On the flip side, you can be building things that are truly delighting users, and you can't directly attribute them to revenue growth because that might be tied to, did marketing generate enough leads? Do we have enough sales capacity, et cetera? But you can know with high conviction if you're seeing usage increase, if you're seeing engagement, that's going to translate to revenue over the long run. So I think that it's a really valuable tool, but you got to use it in the right products and the right scale.
What are the things that you thought would generalize from Meraki and did not?
Meraki, we sold through channel partners. And it turned out that that was the way that people like to buy networking. You want to buy your networking equipment from the same person who's selling you your telephony and your laptops. And those reseller partners were a great way to go to market. We tried that at Samsara, and a lot of actually specific partners that we've been very successful with at Meraki didn't work. And we found that actually these customers wanted to primarily buy directly from us and have a relationship directly with us. So that's something we tried it, wasn't working, very quickly moved on. I think the things that really translated were around culture and values and what I was talking about in terms of being customer centric, being long-term oriented, having this iterative approach to building, and then certain things around the user experience.
As someone who did a lot of marketing as a non-classically trained marketer at Meraki, how did some of the marketing ideas apply? And I'm interested in the fact that I assumed there was this element of category creation and you had the chance to sort of build something new at that time. Did you think much about how are we going to educate, how are we going to create a movement around this, sort of those types of things?
The aspect that really carried over was the idea of showing the product and then letting customers try the product themselves and optimizing everything around that. Both at Meraki and Samsara, and really to this day, we start with a demo, right? And that can be over Zoom, it can be in person, but we start with, we're going to show you a live working system. It's not a sandbox. It's not Figma. We're going to show you live, a live system. When we do our customer conferences, we're only demoing live products. And there were some, people came in from big companies and they said, well, what are you doing? Like, it could go down. It might not work. You should be using mock-ups. We're like, no, we show the real thing. And then making it easy for customers to get their hands on it and try it themselves. That is the piece that really carried over, and I think is a core element of how we go to market.
What is the reason for that?
I think there's definitely some counter positioning against a product where you can't demo it because it's going to be a 9-month deployment. I think some of it is actually just, it reflects the pride in what you've built. And, I see a lot of startups today that lead with demos, and it's awesome. We have our venture program at Samsara where we fund a number of startups who are building in the operations space. I get to see a lot of the founders pitch, and the vast majority of them are leading with demo, and you can see the pride they have in the product that they built. Some companies, I think, lose that as they scale, but there's a handful that hang on to it. I think it really maintains that connection with the people who are building the product and how it's being introduced to customers.
Is there anything else you all have done that you sort of pioneered on the go-to-market side?
In the early days, one thing that we did that was really helpful was we focused on building a scalable sales motion. And, we never did the pure founder selling. Like, we always had a sales team, and it started off very small. But we said, the way to make this successful is to build something that we can sell through a sales team that we can scale.
And so you didn't do the normal thing, we get to 5 million with founder-led sales, then we hire our first AE or sales leader.
That's not how it worked. And in fact, we hired our first ADR or SDR before we had a product to sell. and their job was to book demos. So myself and one of our product managers could basically do live demos of what we were building and get people to say, hey, I will try this out once it's ready. That allowed us to say, hey, go call 100 water utilities and see if this pitch is resonating, right? Go call 100 food and beverage distributors and see if this pitch is resonating, right? And we can see at the very top of the funnel where there's resonance. So when we got to the point where we thought, hey, we have a product that we can try to sell, we started with a small inside sales team and then a couple of field sales reps and said, okay, we are going to build a small but end-to-end sales machine here, something that if it's working, we can scale it. And so that means we start with generating leads. We then turn those leads into demos that our sales reps are doing, then turn that into a free trial, and then turn that into a contract and then a deployment. That process requires you to actually get a bunch of fundamentals right that you might be able to work around if you're founder selling. So, for example, the product needs to be really easy to demo because you need the sales team, not just the people who are setting the roadmap and working with the engineers every day, to be able to just log into a dashboard and show the newest features. You need to figure out what are the pain points that are causing people to pick up the phone in the first place and take a meeting and then take that meeting and translate it to a trial and eventually purchase order. And you're getting that data, you're really kind of at scale. You're making sure that you have a value proposition and a pitch that multiple people can deliver, right? Not just the person who has the founder's zeal, right? And then when it's working end to end, what's amazing about it is you can say, great, now let's go double the size of the sales team. Now let's go double it again. And so I think doing that early on helped us get a lot of those fundamentals right. Similarly, on the post-sales side, we actually said early on, we're going to start with that customer success because that is a very easy way to paper over things that make a product hard to use. We eventually added customer success because it turned out that there were a lot of things that we really needed to help customers with in terms of change management that were not, technology centric. But by saying, well, we're going to have a support rep who can take tickets, but then we need to actually not work around them, but get them resolved in the product itself. And if we can't, we're not going to be able to scale. That also kind of set that foundation.
Something you just hit on. What did you figure out about change management?
We figured out, especially as we started going up market, that it was a real concern for customers. And if you think about these customers, they might say, okay, this product looks great. I've got to go figure out, first of all, how do I go, install devices in 5,000 vehicles or assets that are all over the place and they're always in use. And if they're not in use, I'm not making money off of them. This new system is really easy to use, but I have, hundreds or thousands of frontline workers, so I need to train on it. Actually being able to make change management part of our pitch was super helpful, right? Especially in the enterprise, being able to say, we have the technology, but we will also help you be successful with it. You can get this done end to end in X months, right? That means training thousands of people, getting thousands of assets connected. Here's someone you can talk to who's gone through this, who looks like you, and actually making that kind of peace of mind part of our value proposition, I think was something that emerged over time, especially as we really started to go up market. And, that also really helped establish that relationship where we're not just trying to sell the customer something and move on. We're actually trying to partner with them for many, many years to come, which then turns into product feedback, which allows us to build more products and then sell them to these customers as well as new products.
What are some of the tactics that have been interesting that have really worked? Like, I think it's such an interesting point where, you have drivers of these trucks that have been doing this a certain way for a long time. You have so many stakeholders that have been doing their jobs in a specific way for a long period of time. And once you bring data and analytics and real-time feedback, someone then has to go do something with that to sort of have a positive impact on the business.
Yeah, some of it was actually taking what we heard back from customers and then saying, how do we get this out to everyone? So, for example, when we started with our safety cameras, you had some drivers who had been driving a truck for 40 years and they say, this is Big Brother. I don't want this in my face. And we actually had customers say, oh, what we did was we started by first putting it in the VP of Safety's own car so they can see that we're doing it ourselves. And then we start by putting it on the 5 safest drivers' cars, the absolute best ones. And invariably, there is an accident or a near miss where that camera shows that they did the right thing and they're not at fault. And then you take that video and then you share it with everyone and then you go roll it out. And then as you're rolling it out, you also roll out a safe driver bonus program where we say, we're going to save all this money with this technology. We're going to take a portion of it and give it as bonuses for drivers who have high safety scores. That's something that, we started hearing these anecdotes for customers and kind of turning them into a playbook. And now it's something that we have really well packaged up that's easy for us to onboard customers to. But that kind of keeps evolving as we get new ideas from customers, as we build new products. And we almost think of that as it's not a technology product, but it is like a product in that way of we're hearing about what works, we're finding ways to make it scalable and then baking it in.
What are the things that you've had to change your mind about as the company has gone sort of in each chapter of growth?
How we use revenue to motivate and align product managers is something that's changed a lot. Early on, revenue was a really, really good indicator of product market fit. And it was something that, we could kind of rally everyone behind. We got to a point where actually we had really strong product market fit across multiple products. The customer experience was actually starting to degrade in some ways. We had some rough edges to the product, which kind of makes sense when you think about how fast we grew, but it wasn't hurting revenue growth. And we actually had to say, okay, no, we need folks to just really focus on customer experience and obsess over that. And we got to a point where we said, actually, our customer experience is great. We talk to customers. They're really, really happy. We're still focused on how do we kind of get from 99.9 to 99.99%. And they're saying, we'd love you to go build these new products and solve new problems for us. We need to reorient folks back towards saying, okay, what are these new things that we can build? And, how are we either, driving adoption or driving revenue growth? So, the thing that we need to focus on, I think has changed over time, and I'm sure it'll continue to change. It's also different in, different parts of the business, like different products, different geographies. So that's something that requires us to hit refresh. I think, an area that we sort of had to go through a bit of a journey on is how we think about organizing and communicating our roadmap. And when the company was very small, it could be very dynamic and everyone's, literally in the same building having lunch together, kind of typical sort of startup feel. And the superpower of startups is you can be super dynamic and everyone stays in sync. We went through a period where we had grown from, a few hundred people to a few thousand people. We're seeing a lot of strain from that. So we put in a lot of process to have much more predictable, well-defined roadmaps. And it solved some problems, but it actually meant that we were slowing down, right? We weren't able to iterate as quickly, weren't able to ship as quickly. And said, actually, a lot of what we were doing in those early days of how do you get something to a demoable form quickly? How do you get in front of customers? How do you run that feedback loop? That's what we need to be doing now. We need to figure out how to make that work across, a multi-thousand person company, but we need to be doing that and not acting like IBM, right? And so that's an area that I think has been really exciting, over the last, period of time, kind of figuring out how do we pull in those elements from really operating as a startup with customer scale and, scale of engineers and product managers and designers. And actually what we've been able to ship has just exploded, right? Which has been really, really fun.
Does what's happening with LLMs and more broadly with AI, does it feel like the early days of Samsara when you had all these converging technologies, at least on the hardware side, dropping costs? You could do all sorts of incredible things with Bluetooth, et cetera. Does it feel like that, or it feels more profound or different? Or
100%. Even today, with more and more AI built into the product, the data that we're collecting from our customers' operations, it's like an iceberg. Like we're helping customers action on just the very tip. And, it had really amazing results with that. But there's so much data in the system that is still untapped. LLMs and all of the advancements in AI are just radically changing how we can make that data useful for customers in a way that doesn't require them putting more staff and personnel behind understanding the data and acting on it. And, it's really radically changed our ability to make data useful. And, rewind 5 years ago, we started building AI in products for the first time. Really started with a safety product. We had these dash cameras and they would capture accidents and near misses. These were detected by someone slamming on the brakes. So a high G-force event, it would upload video. And you look at these, and so many of them were drivers on their phone, distracted, right? So we started building AI to basically detect distraction and mobile usage, and give the driver a reminder to put their phone down, make it such that you could run a program where you rewarded drivers for not using their phones while driving. And that had a massive difference in accident rates. We kind of stacked on different features on top of that, like drowsiness or tailgating or rolling stop signs, all these different kind of safety behaviors. Each of those were pretty slow and expensive to build, because we had to basically build new AI models from each of them. We're kind of training them on top of all this dash camera data. Now we can use LLMs as a starting point, and we can start to do things that just would have been impossible before, right? So for example, now if you slam on the brakes and it's because someone cut you off, or a pedestrian ran into the road, or an ambulance crossed in front of you even though you had a green light, the AI can actually watch that video and say, hey, rather than lower your safety score for slamming on the brakes, I'm going to increase your safety score for driving defensively. That's something that, if you have a big enough team and you have someone reviewing every video clip, you could do manually, but most customers don't, right? So whether it's, that you can apply ideas like that to maintenance, to fuel consumption, to training, to doing safety inspections at a job site, like all of these different areas. And all of the data is there, but now we can actually just make it meaningful in ways that was really not possible before.
Who has influenced you the most as a company builder that's not a family member? And what's the thing that they imparted on you that's like a big part of your worldview of company building more broadly?
The practical answer is that, Sanjit is someone who I've now known for, over 25 years. He's been my boss for the last 15 plus. And, just by virtue of working together for so long, he's had an incredible impact. We started doing computer science classes together as undergrads, going from that to building Meraki and now Samsara. I think, a lot of it has been the process of building together. A lot of his superpowers, I won't say they've rubbed off on me, but there's something that I can try to emulate.
What are those superpowers?
Probably the biggest are his ability to be very strategic and be thinking about markets and technology trends and multi-year cycles, and then kind of get into the details of, this model could run on this chipset and could enable this feature, which would be useful to this customer. And that ability to kind of span those different altitudes. And this is kind of nuclear powered creativity and sense for what's possible, and kind of never being complacent and always looking to see how can we do more. So that's the one that I've, got to be building with and learn by doing.
Cool. Great place to end. Thanks for spending all the time with us. This was awesome.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.